Hey there, and welcome back to Start Adventuring, a channel dedicated to empowering new roleplayers to break down their barriers and just start adventuring. I'm Baxter.
And I'm Ben. And this is a meeting of our Homebrew book club where Baxter and I look at pre-written Dungeons & Dragons modules and think about how we would make them our own if we were going to adapt them for our table. We're continuing our coverage of the Candlekeep Mysteries, taking a look at the 12th adventure in the Candlekeep Mysteries collection, The Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale. So Baxter and I are going to just be talking about how we would prep this adventure, what we would change, how we would homebrew it. We've got some notes here on the side so you can follow along, and join us as we talk about it.
Yeah. So let's start off pretty basic. Ben, what were your overall thoughts of the adventure? Did you like it? Are you interested in it? What's the sitch?
So I do kind of think, because you and I were running all of when we did our one-on-one shots campaign, we were running them all as single session adventures. And I think that this one does lend itself to that. Right. By the way, if you're watching this, we're operating under the assumption that you know what's going on in this adventure. So if you haven't read it yet, pause this video. We'll be here. Take a look at it, skim it, or have it open while we're talking about it. We have it open. We'll be going along together with it while we talk about it. But spoilers.
Yes, if you have not read it, you should do it now.
So I think for this adventure, it takes place it's one of the Candlekeep Mystery Adventures that takes place in like a separate plane, right? It's in its own self-contained situation, like with Price of Beauty, or even the first one, Joy of Extra-Dimensional Spaces, or to a lesser extent...
Lore of LaRue is another one.
Lore of LaRue, right, or even to a lesser extent, Shemshime's Bedtime Rhyme, although that one doesn't take place in like a pocket dimension. And I like those for these one-shot adventures because you can keep everything kind of contained. In this adventure, you're being sent to find this high-level bard who is kind of a bad guy, but also kind of a good guy. He's got corrupted by dark magic from an evil god, and you're supposed to find him inside of this demi-plane where he's been basically imprisoned and administer a cure for his madness.
Right.
In the form of a dagger that you're given kind of before the adventure by a member of the organization that this bard used to be affiliated with, the Harpers. Right. As written, it's the Harpers. I would consider changing it, making it whatever you want it to be. All of that summary to say there's a lot of different story stuff going on here, because once you get there, you find out that he has been double imprisoned, because now he's actually the prisoner of a beholder that has somehow entered into the demi-plane. It's a lot of moving parts. That's my first key takeaway. My first note, if you look on the notes that we have written, is that there's like a double setup that I think can be a little bit of an encumbrance, especially if you're running this as a one-shot, because you have to explain all of the information about this is what the Wisteria Dale, sorry, we've been playing our Icewind Dale game. Wisteria Vale, this is what the Wisteria Vale demi-plane is about, right? This is what this guy Quill is about, who's trapped in there, and here's why you want to go in there, find him, stab him with the dagger, and free him. But then you get into the demi-plane, and there's a whole other setup that has to take place where the players realize, oh, the real issue here is there's this beholder. So I feel like that's a little bit arduous for a one-shot, especially. If I were going to run it, I think it would be important to kind of pick which of those storylines is more interesting to you. The beholder... there's a beholder that's taken over this peaceful fictional town, or there's this high-powered bard who has, gone mad, and is inside of this demi-plane.
So you
the complications that arise from that.
You kind of hit on a couple of my different initial thoughts. So the bottommost one, logistically complex. I mean, that's what I was. The vibe that I got is there's a lot of moving parts, but not all of them are necessarily connected or even. I don't want to say they don't matter, but the other one that you hit was my top one. Demi-plane equals demi-stakes, which just means to me that in a lot of ways, if you are having a adventure that is removed from your version of reality or your version of the world, the stakes that exist are contingent on something from that realm of existence that you're in has to affect the world as you know it, or else it all just kind of seems like there's not really a defined reason for your character. Like, there's not, like, a greater threat, if you understand, if you know what I mean. And
yeah,
the logistical complexity of this, I think, almost tries to mask that by adding a lot of turns and loops and different things once you get into the adventure.
Because it's almost like a twist when you realize the beholder situation is what it is,
well,
right?
It's almost similar. Another thing that kind of comes to mind to me is it's written from an information standpoint, similarly to Book of the Raven, in which you kind of go in with limited information. Like, you know your basic objective, right? You know you're supposed to find this guy Quill, stab him with the dagger, and that will cure him.
Right.
But, like, as written, this character doesn't, like, it is contingent on if he trusts the players are on his side, if he allows them to stab him. But then there's also all these layers of getting to the point where you can do something like that.
Right, because the adventure also, like, really front loads a lot of finding Quill, right? I mean,
sure.
You don't, because there's a fake Quill, as written, who's in the manor under the control of the beholder, right? And here's something maybe to ask you. How would you make the connective tissue between getting there, going to the manor, discovering fake Quill is fake, and discovering that real Quill is still there but imprisoned, and also you've got this beholder who I don't think the beholder's intentions, like, I think the beholder's intentions are kind of up to you as the DM as well, because as written, the beholder has entered this space and is under the impression that it is actually the creator of this plane, and that it exists for the beholder's pleasure.
I think what I would do is I would have the group that is hiring the players for this job say to them, hey, we imprisoned this, Quill in the book to try while we worked on a cure. We can no longer sense him within that book. We need you. We've made the cure. We have this dagger. We need you to go in there to see if he's still in there and stab him. And then the idea could be that, like, they can't sense him because he is in the pocket dimension. Again, it gets very logistically complex. That the other part of it that I'm not a huge fan about is I think it requires a lot of initial, like, specific Dungeons and Dragons or what is Forgotten Realms lore in order to buy into the larger story at play. You have to be familiar with demi-planes, pocket dimensions, what a beholder is and its powers. Like, I think a new player hearing, well, the beholder thinks that it created this world, that feels, wow, maybe that is a, seeded thing within the Forgotten Realms lore and archetype of the beholder itself. A new player, I don't think, really has the wherewithal or the understanding to put all those pieces, neatly in a pile, right?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And honestly, like, the beholder in this adventure, in terms of the stat block, is just a regular beholder. There's not a ton of information about role-playing this beholder or what the beholder wants or is doing.
Right.
Like, I almost would just lean into Quill. You know what I mean? My second initial thought was, I think Quill's stat block is cool. Quill has some cool abilities in there. He's got basically like a super powered vicious mockery ability that does a ton of damage. That's something I would just give a villain bard character. That's just cool. I would give that to a PC, maybe nerfed or something. But people love vicious mockery. It's like a favorite spell, but it only does, a D4 of damage or whatever. And I don't think you can scale it up or anything because it's a cantrip. It may scale up as you level.
Yeah, I know some cantrips do. I'll be honest, I'm not positive if vicious mockery is one of them.
Either way, this does, I think, 12d10 damage, which is like a ton compared to vicious mockery. And I think it's cool. And I think Quill is an interesting character. He's like this. He was traumatized as a child, and he became this legendary hero, kind of. And then he was tragically corrupted, fighting this evil magician or something.
Right.
Like, all that stuff is cool, but you don't have time for any of that stuff. I mean, if you want to make this adventure about freeing Quill from the Beholder and you're doing it as a one-shot, you've got to do like you did, like you said, the Harpers or whoever, whatever the faction is that's sending you in to do this, should kind of already be aware of the situation so they can give you a good briefing at the beginning.
Right, or at the very least not arbitrary, but like know that like something is off. Because if they just send you in and say, go find this guy and kill him, and then there's that twist added in, it feels like you were led down a rabbit hole that nobody really knew what was going on, which just kind of feels bad.
It feels bad.
It just
like
feels
when you
bad.
When you figure out about fake Quill, like I'm trying to imagine the kind of step-by-step of this. You don't necessarily want your party to discover the fake Quill and then be like, oh, well, is he even... I mean, I guess he's not even here? Like, you should put some kind of clue or evidence that leads them to the conclusion that, oh, Quill is here, but he's trapped in the paintings.
Right.
Because, like, maybe I missed it when I read it. I read through it, once all the way through, and then I was kind of looking for these answers in different places. I don't really see how you communicate to the players, oh, Quill is here. Like, he still is here. It's not like this Beholder has just killed him. Because, I mean, I think players would logically reach the conclusion that Quill has just been eliminated or something. But I guess
right,
the fact
or
that
Quill himself was an illusion made by this Beholder. Like, it does, yes, to your point, and this was, I began this thought, and I don't think I ever finished it. The idea of the fake, of them saying, we can't find Quill he's dropped off the radar, essentially. Then when you see him in the manor, you might be like, well, wait, they said he dropped off the radar, and maybe that builds the idea that it's not really him. But even then, it's, there's a lot of kind of leaps in logic, again, adding to that logistically complex idea, that I don't think that a new player would make for sure, and I don't even think a seasoned player would even immediately jump to that conclusion. They could just think that the Beholder and he are working together to do whatever. Like, the motivations for the Beholder, for the Harpers, for Quill. I keep wanting to... I think he is also very reminiscent in some ways of Strahd. So in a lot of my notes, I had him listed as Strahd Light. But...
It kind of is, because it's like he's got this lair, he's presiding over this limited area, and he's this kind of charismatic villain. But, like, as it stands, I think Quill is one of the greater strengths of this adventure, which is why I would just lean into him, because the way that the adventure actually plays out, he's kind of secondary, right? Like, if you can't convince him you're on his side, he just teleports away to some other place in town, right? So go, I guess,
find him again?
Then what? You just go looking for him, and the Beholder, I guess, just forget about it. I don't know. Like, I would cut the Beholder. I would just cut the Beholder. Honestly, I think unless you were going to make it about, it's like a Luigi's Mansion style thing,
right?
And you go to this party, because that's the other thing, we haven't really talked about the party either. Like, this party is supposed to be the climactic kind of event of the adventure. I would also lean into foreshadowing or even accelerating the onset of that event. Like, I know you had suggested, just kind of offhand before we started really talking about it, you could have them arrive in Wisteria Vale when the party is happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, to kind of streamline it. Because, frankly, most of the village, while it's kind of interesting from a role-play perspective, and it adds some, sandbox-ish elements, like, I think the note that I had was the village, as written in this module, would be really cool to add to, like, the beginning of Lore of LaRue or something. Obviously having to make some adjustments to the lore and things like that to make it all fit together. But
you could use sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but like, I'm just thinking, because you could use the village to set up the lore. But here, the lore that you need, you have to get before you go in, because the lore of Wisteria Vale is not real meaningful lore, right? The only information that you're getting from the villagers is, oh, this monster has showed up, and we haven't really seen much of Quill. Which, honestly, like, you're gonna find out if you just go straight to the manor anyway.
There. Start the party as soon as you can. Because, honestly,
and
I
think that could be metaphorical, too. Just, like...
Yeah, get to the point. Because in this specific adventure, I mean, if your party is spending all of their time investigating the village, like, there's a lot of different characters, some interesting things, but ultimately the only pertinent information that they can get from these constructed in the world NPCs, so it's not even like the real people, is there's a party at the manor tonight, we haven't seen Quill, and it's like, that's pretty much it. It's like, there's a party, we haven't seen Quill, I really want this party to go well, hope you can come. It's at the manor.
Yeah, and then at the end of the day, what probably will end up happening is the PCs go, okay, well, let's wait and go to the party.
Or they'll say, let's go to the manor now, and then, I feel like it's almost there to essentially add a, for lack of a better term, like, time limit. Like, if the players don't go to the manor in enough time, well, eventually there's a party at the manor, and everyone in the village will leave and go to the manor, so the players will have to go there too. But I think what would be more interesting is maybe the magic book prison is now unstable, and it's starting to deteriorate. So, like, there's already a sense of urgency for, the Harpers or whatever faction you use that is, created it or using it, whatever, says to you, look, you need to get in there and you need to get out ASAP because the world itself is collapsing. We don't know why. And maybe it's the Beholder's presence that's doing it. But again, the issue that I have with all of it is a new player coming into this will be so lost at the logic and, like, inner workings of the worlds, if you know what I mean. Because it just feels like, here's your world, here's a shoebox, and then he's in the shoebox in a shoebox. Do you know what I mean? Because he's in this pocket dimension of the demi-plane. And so I think a new player for sure would get very lost in a lot of the logistics. And I don't think that it would serve best unless they are just given, hey, you're going in here, it's collapsing, get to your objective, and that's it. But then, like I said, the village is almost a moot point because they're just skipping over it to get to where they need to go.
And I guess it kind of depends too on, like, how long you intend to kind of be in this adventure, right? Because if you're doing it, but like, the thing is, like, I could see it lasting multiple sessions, but it feels fluffy. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah,
Like, it feels like
yeah.
you could. I can imagine an entire session where you're getting this job, getting the background, going to Candlekeep, finding the play, learning about Quill from the play, learning about how to get into Wisteria Vale. Like, I don't know why on earth, though, if the Harpers were hiring you, they wouldn't straight up tell you exactly how to get into the demiplane. Like, as written, it's like they just tell you where to find the book and then figure it out from there. Like, I as a player would lose my mind if that's what I was told. Is like,
yeah, that's my biggest note. Is as a player, if like as a DM reading through this, it's kind of interesting. There's some cool stuff at play a little bit. Not a little, but there is. I mean, there's a lot of, like I said, logistical complexity that makes it a little not. But as a player, if I were playing through this, I don't know what my motivation for doing it in the first place would be. I don't, if someone came up to me and say, hey, I have a guy trapped in this book, can you go get him? I'd be like, well, what's in it for me? We'll pay you a lot of gold. Okay, like, depending on what the situation of the campaign is, it just feels like, and that's my second point, is lore should be relevant, meaning if you're slotting this into a campaign, you got to change the Harpers. In most situations, you'd have to change the Harpers. You'd kind of have to change why the party is interested in getting Quill. Maybe Quill is useful to you or your overarching story or whatever. Maybe it's not a beholder. Maybe it's the main villain of your campaign trying to do... But, like, again, it just, like, relies on a lot of specificity in your campaign, and it just...
But I don't think that's a problem. I mean, I think that's actually kind of good. That I actually think that this module is successful in that you can pretty easily fudge those things without it causing any huge
major ripples in the
issue to the thing. Like, yeah, it could just as easily be there's some kind of powerful spellcaster who's been imprisoned in this place, and either A, somebody wants to get him out because he can be cured, or someone wants to, finish him once and for all, so you're going to infiltrate his prison and just bring an end to him or something.
Right.
Or, like you said, a villain that you're aware of, right? So if there's a beholder villain in your game, or if there's literally any kind of villain, because I don't even think that it's necessary for this to be a beholder. And as we said, the motivations and kind of like explanations around what the beholder is doing there are pretty thin. So in that way, it can be modulated, I think, pretty effectively. But if I was going to run it as a one-shot, it's tricky, right? Like, I think what I would do is just say you are a member of this organization. Like, everybody who's going to play, okay, cool, you're a member of this adventuring organization, whether it's the Harpers or you want to give them whatever, fun name you like for the organization in your game.
Set up the player's motivation from the start.
Yeah, I mean, that's a universal... We always talk about player motivation, but it's always worth talking about. And I do think that this one is pretty thin in terms of what it gives you. So you're going to have to come up with something.
Yeah,
because
the motivation in this one has to be tailored to the player's specific circumstance. Similar, I mean, as always, but in this one specifically because... Again, in a demi-plane, there's demi-stakes, so you have to... Like, the other thing that I had put for a note for that is maybe the beholder is trying to use Quill, somehow, to get from the curious tale of Wisteria Vale into the real world to wreak havoc. And so then there's some level
that would make more sense, right? Like,
I have to stop this so he doesn't... Or they don't come into my reality.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, maybe it was able to get to this demi-plane, but it can't, fully escape from it's like a stepping stone in its plan to, I don't know, do something on the material plane or whatever you want to say, whatever the cosmology of your Dungeons & Dragons world is. But yeah, like, that makes a lot of sense to me. You have to give a motivation to the villain of this adventure, because as it exists, like, Quill is boring too. Like, you find Quill and he maybe he trusts you, maybe he doesn't.
Right.
What is he? He's just been living there, doing his thing. He's gone crazy. Like, I think you could lean into the madness element of it, right? Like, you don't even need, maybe he's got the beholder and he and the beholder are buds. Like, I don't know why it's got to be that the beholder has double crossed Quill and now you've got to mediate between the two of them.
Maybe you would start it almost like that's a act 2, right, with the beholder doing all that. But like act 1 is maybe he is trying to summon a beholder to help him escape, and he does that, and then it fails. But like, again, the issue that I have is that is, you know, we already have on your side of the notes table there double setup. Like, that's a triple setup.
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to if you're playing multiple sessions, right? Like, the double setup would be fine if it wasn't one setup after another, but the current double setup is like you set all this information up, and then you do the portal, which at the most invested is a kind of roundabout puzzle about holding light up to invisible ink that, honestly, the Harper who hired you should have told you about anyway. Right. It's weird that they wouldn't. But the only reason why you would keep that is so that it's something to do between lore dumps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I honestly think you're onto something, that if you were going to do this as multiple sessions, you would set up the Quill situation, pay off the Quill situation, then introduce the Beholder situation. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But there's no payoff to the initial setup until you've already handled this other pocket thing. And the other thing I wanted to talk about were, and this is related to the whole Beholder section of the adventure, which is to say you're in the manor avoiding the Beholder potentially, or the Beholder is hiding in the ballroom and you are just poking around. But there are some random roll tables in this adventure. One is to indicate that something is off in Wisteria Vale because things are happening as a result of the Beholder. Right. I would say be sparing about using that and be intentional about using that, because I'm trying to think, like, you use stuff like that to elevate what's going on, right? Whether it's a situation where, like, and it doesn't matter, any of the things that come up should elevate the situation, right? But if you have no idea about the Beholder or anything going on, I think you're just going, wow, yeah, this is a weird place. Yeah, I smell a thing. Yeah. Oh, it's raining. Like,
there's not really a way for the players to understand that the world is crumbling or disoriented or whatever from those things, at least not immediately. They might think, like, oh, that's weird, but, like, if anything, I think it just reinforces that it is an artificially generated world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And furthermore, kind of on that note, with the roll tables, the other thing that I think was strange with it is the way that they implemented it within the painting rooms. It's like this weird thing of, like, you have to just push your players against a wall until they roll the correct thing to find his prison chamber or whatever.
Right. My sense with these roll tables is that the players aren't going to be like, whoa, what a crazy... I mean, you could write
your own kind of a thing, but, like, the one that sticks out to me as super boring is the rock painting, the big bird painting or room or whatever it was, where you essentially are just put in front of a big bird thing. It's like, fight it, go, do it.
Yeah. Well, not only do I think that, I mean, yeah, so it's one thing to talk about the chambers, because basically what happens is you start going into the paintings and you go in there and each of the paintings goes to a different chamber that kind of has an encounter there. But then when you're ready to leave, once you finish those encounters, you can pick one of 3 doors, but all of the doors will randomly take you to a different chamber. Based on a roll. And I don't think there's any way that the players are ever going to feel like they understand how that works.
Right.
They're just going to be like, okay, I guess I go through that door until eventually they find Quill, right? Which is fine, but you have to ask yourself as the DM, like, is this just going to add a bunch of time where nothing interesting is going on?
You know, again, it really rings similar to me as Book of the Raven, in the sense that the players don't really get a lot of information, and I think more than anything, players would just be confused playing through this, going, maybe it's kind of supposed to be like a, multiverse of madness, name dropping there, kind of a thing where it's like they have no control over where they're going and they just have to ride through the chaos. But like, I don't think that ever is interesting. Right, exactly. I don't ever think that that's interesting for the players in terms of like it would be interesting-ish if it was like they have one completely random chaotic encounter they know beforehand, like the Beholder just sends them through a chaos portal and you have to roll for whatever that encounter is. But then after that encounter, they get the door that leads to the prison, but even that just feels, again, like to your point, it just feels like they're trying to staple something on to add a little meat to the bones.
Yeah. Which hey, if you're cutting the village, like,
I get like the idea.
If you want to play the version of this adventure that I'm imagining where, you go to the village and they say something terrible has happened with Quill. He hasn't come out. This monster showed up, and now we haven't seen him in all this time. You go to the manor, I would just cut fake Quill. I would have the Beholder wandering around, and the party has to avoid the Beholder while they try to figure out where Quill is. And, you give them clues that lead them to the paintings, and then, play it closer to as written from there. Although I would fully cut the part where you open the doors and you go to a random chamber within this cluster of 4 rooms. Like, I just think that the players are going to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out how that works. And I guess there are some groups for whom it might be fun for it to be like, yeah, it was just crazy to begin with. Ha ha ha, you spent all that time. But like, especially if you're running this as a one-shot, it should deliver, something meaningful, some meaningful game experience as you go. There shouldn't be a lot of like, nope, that was just a trap, a trick.
Structurally, so this is the other thing that I think about. Structurally, what is the mystery of this Candlekeep mystery? Right? It's like, it's not really a developed mystery as much as it's like a bunch of plot twists thrown at the players. But also
the mystery is where is Quill and what's going on with Quill, but that's not what it's set up as.
Right,
so the players don't realize that's what they're trying to do.
It's like the mystery is not told to the players, but it's also the end, like it is the adventure, so to speak. So it falls, again, in line with like Book of the Raven, where it's like you need to give your players as much information as they need up front, or else they're going to spend the entire thing confused. And generally speaking, confused in D&D is good if it's done in a way where the players have the ability to access that information somewhere, somehow. But in this one, like, the Beholder isn't accessible information until you see it. Unless you reconstruct some things. The fact
or I think that some of the villagers will talk about it. If your players who have been told you're going in here to get to this guy decide, actually, I'd like to go to the fantasy shoe store.
But they don't. Did they talk about the Beholder? I don't remember that. I remember them talking about
there are some who will talk about it, but again, it's one of those situations where like you as the DM should just decide whatever villager they encounter says something about it.
But that that doesn't feel earned, in my opinion. Like, what I think I would do in this, you said you would eliminate fake Quill. I think I would have fake Quill going around talking to, like, I would have him introduced from the get-go outside of the castle almost, if you want to keep the village, and have it be that the villagers, instead of saying they haven't seen him or they've seen a monster or something like that, they just say he's been acting strange.
Yeah.
And that way the players kind of know, okay, so we're told that the organization that sent us can't find him on the map, and that the NPCs that are generated even are saying he is acting strange. So that would kind of indicate to the players that something is awry with that character, and maybe they would try to stab him using the magic cure dagger from the get-go, and he would disappear, and
or turn into one of those constructs, right?
Sure, yeah, or something like that.
Because when the constructs, if the constructs get destroyed, they like turn into wooden dolls, and that would be kind of interesting. Yeah. I like that idea. I think that would totally work if you wanted to do it like that.
And that would then set up this idea of like, okay, well then who's in the castle if this is a fake?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like totally that, I think that's probably where I would lean into in terms of getting like the easiest way to at the very least give the PCs enough information to go off of, okay, that guy's a fake. Because as written in the final encounter, like it has a list, like, you know, the fake Quill can walk and talk, but he can't do anything else, and he can't take damage unless it's a magic item, right? And it's like, but then it's like there's a lot of interesting is the most positive way I could put it, ways in which the beholder interacts with both fake Quill and real Quill, where it's like if they're within a certain range, their damage immune. It's like a very strange, like it's written into the thing so that he disappears from the fight. I don't really get, like, it doesn't really seem like it's logistically sound. It seems like they needed something to happen, so they put it they invented a way to make it okay mechanically or something.
Yeah, right. I don't think that the final boss encounter is very good in this adventure. I mean,
right.
It's not well established, right? Like, you're basically forced to have it happen.
Right, exactly.
When you get to Quill, no matter what the circumstances were by which you figured all this stuff out and got to the thing, you are leaving the painting to enter into a party that the beholder is throwing, and fake Quill is there. Which, honestly, in the version that you just described, where like they've already dispatched or at least encountered fake Quill, it could be more interesting. But right. Yeah, again, I would invest time as the DM into figuring out, like, what is the final encounter? How does it work? Like I said, I would potentially just want to have it be a fight against, you know, a corrupted Quill who is, like, really resistant to being cured, right?
Yeah, like, maybe... you know, maybe he summoned the beholder to help him get out. Maybe I think there needs to be a reason for the real Quill to not want to leave the world.
Right.
Or something.
Because as it stands, it's like, well, he's gone crazy, so he doesn't trust you.
Right.
Plus, unfortunately, the Harpers' only way they could come up with to administer this cure is we have to stab you. Which, again, like, that's kind of fun in as much as if I were role-playing Quill, I would be like, what the heck? I don't trust that one bit. Because the other thing is that the dagger apparently resembles the dagger that like, scarred his face as a kid. So it's a very bad plan on the Harper's part.
Well, and also... like, what does anybody stand to gain from any of this? Like, what do the Harpers want Quill out of the book for? So he's cured? But by the end of the book, it's like, I just don't feel like the end narrative makes much sense based on what you're told at the beginning and what actually happens. Like, they need you to get him out of the book for, like, why?
The complication of the beholder just I don't think isn't well married to the overall story. Like, what's going on between Quill and the beholder is the kind of connective tissue that is, one, going to really shape how this adventure plays out for you at the table, but also it's going to be necessary to justify what you as the DM are kind of imagining is going on.
I guess not fluid. You have to construct
I would just say connect the beholder and Quill together, you know, like you have to add connective tissue there. Or
you have to connect beholder and Quill, or even the faction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because the thing is, the big thing that I get is the jumping off point. The faction in this case, it's the Harpers as written, wants you to get Quill out of the book because they have the cure now, but they just they put him in there. Like, how can they not just pull him out, I guess is my question. Or like, wouldn't it make more sense to send one of them in there who knows Quill, who they might be more like receptive to than just like random people?
Yeah, that's all good questions. And that all ties into what I was saying about the whole double setup thing. Is like, there are 1,000 questions. If I'm a player and I'm told, okay, this organization that created this prison and put this guy in it wants you to go in there and stab the guy to pre-cure him and also end the prison and get him out cured, and they'll pay you a bunch of gold. There's 1,000 questions that I'm asking along the lines of like, well, yeah, why can't get this guy out? Why we gotta stab him? Wouldn't it, do you have any advice on like how to accomplish this? There's
Does he want out? Like, he's gone crazy. Okay, so he's gonna it almost feels like they had to add some level of nuisance or some level of like opposing force that was attached, because the Beholder is kind of not attached. And the only thing that they could think of was, well, if he's crazy, he's just gonna like not he's acting almost like a Beholder where he's paranoid. But it's like, I don't know.
But so why wouldn't he be working with the Beholder?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
it's like, why?
In my version of this, you don't need two bad guys.
Right.
Like, you don't need. Like, it's messy. Like
the
you said,
the factions that are in
for a single adventure.
Like the people that hire you just want you to stab Quill. That's their get in there and stab Quill. The Beholder just wants to keep being in this existence because he thinks they created it. Like, it doesn't really add up to, like, okay, I guess, but then Quill wants to stay, but like he doesn't want to, like, he doesn't trust that the way that you're going to get him out will actually get him out, I guess, and he thinks that you're just gonna kill him. But
it's one of those things. It's like we've said, it's pretty complicated, and you as the DM, I think, would be served to simplify it. Because, it being that complicated for you as the DM means it's 100 times less clear for the players.
Right.
And if it's not clear for the players what's going on and what they're trying to do at the very least, I mean, they don't need to know every detail of it, but the basic, this is what we're doing. Like, the players should always have in their head, I think, this is the objective. Do you know what I mean? Because as soon as they don't, they're just like, okay, well, what does the DM want me to do?
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
And that's kind of
when
the
it all
worst place,
collapses.
I think, for an adventure to be, unless it is some grandiose situation in which it's a, climactic point of an adventure in which, but even then, I digress. The point here is that if you don't set up proper motivation for the faction, for Quill, or for the Beholder, it's just 3 random parties with random interests setting up roadblocks for the player characters because there needs to be roadblocks.
And I think that the more meaningful an obstacle is, the more exciting it is to overcome.
Right.
So if you have a meaningless obstacle, like, part of the game is fighting monsters, getting the stuff out of your way that's bad. But, like, you as the DM, by connecting these things, can make it more narratively and just sort of, like, experientially rewarding, as opposed to just, we beat the level because we were supposed to. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Again, the motivation here that you need to draw for the factions that be is super crucial, and the reason it's super crucial is because it will inform the player motivation to a degree, right? Because then they at least know kind of whom they're working for and why they're working for them and whom they're working against and why they're working against them. Whereas as written, it's very much, hey, you need to go do this, whatever it takes, like whatever, and then you just kind of have to deal with the situation. It just feels, and part of, there is some element of that in, Dungeons and Dragons in general, in a lot of the modules that are written, it's like this idea of the chaotic world of, but I don't know, in a vacuum like this, in a demiplane, in a modular adventure, it's just not concrete enough for me to feel like the players would have a vested interest in even starting this adventure. You know what I mean? Unless you told them from the get-go, you work for this organization and you need to do this. But that seems like, poking them up a tree before they've even started.
Yeah. So, I just took a look again at the adventure, and on our last point about connecting the Beholder and Quill, there is information that you can get from exploring the library, that basically is like, Quill was trying to get close to the Beholder to use the Beholder to get out.
Okay.
And the Beholder became paranoid and imprisoned him. That's all fine. I'm still thinking in terms of timelines here, that, like...
I just don't feel like the players are, like, if they are sent with the objective, you need to find Quill and put this dagger in him, and there's a fake Quill walking around, if they haven't already stabbed that fake Quill or tried to, I just don't see the players spending a lot of vested time, like, looking through the different rooms. I just don't, like...
Also, if they're sneaking around this manor, I don't know when it's going to make sense for them to sit down and read a bunch of journals.
Well, and that's
unless
what
they've
I'm saying.
Already
it
fought
feels...
the Beholder, in which case now you don't have a final boss, really. Like, it's very anticlimactic. You know what I mean?
I don't think there's ever a universe, personally, where I feel like a player reading a book to get information is ever really that interesting.
Yeah, if it's to get side lore during downtime or like a long rest or something,
that's fine.
But a lot of these Candlekeep Mysteries have it written where it's like, yeah, you're exploring this place, and if you stop for an hour and read these journals, you can find out what's going on. That's like, that really busts into the show don't tell thing.
Yes,
where you end up just telling, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, it's fine. It works. It's not my favorite way to give this exposition.
No.
And I feel like if it's so complicated, if what's going on is so kind of out of left field that the players wouldn't be able to figure it out unless they, read all the bonus journals and stuff that they can collect by walking through the manor.
In fact, I'm going to add a note on Lean Into Quill, because I do kind of feel like it is in some ways attached. Show, don't tell. Meaning, when it comes to Quill's motivations, his backstory, the situation that he finds himself in, you have to show the players what he is trying to do. Don't tell them through a book. Don't tell them through... I mean, you could maybe put hints, like I said, in the village of the players saying something's up, or the NPCs saying something's up. But, to give exposition that crucial through a random book in the library of the second half of the chapter just feels almost random.
I just imagine that there are a lot of situations where the players are never going to encounter that.
Exactly.
Right?
And again, that's probably speaking more from our personal experience with our own home games and the tables that we generally play, but we don't really have a lot of party members who will be like, okay, let's go to every room, let's look at absolutely everything, especially if you have, like I said, a mission that is so crucial as you have a dagger, you need to stab a guy, the guy is in here, you've seen him walking around, You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's just not a universe in which you stop to read books.
Well, because yeah, and then there's this other wrinkle about him being immune to damage unless he's near the beholder.
Exactly, right.
So,
like I said, the weird mechanic
but the
things
rules
to
of it
explain
are like
things away.
flexible and yeah, and it's like, well, that's why you can't just run up and stab him, I guess. And it's like, well, that's convenient. I mean, it just seems it's so weird because the Harpers made this prison. So why would they make the only way to cure him to stab him in a place where he can't be stabbed? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
The logistics of it are very complex, and my original note, which I think was too negative, but was a logistical nightmare, meaning that there's just a lot of intrinsic work you have to do to make everything connect and fit and flow in a way that your players don't feel completely confused until the final scene. Because, you know, if Quill's like, don't stab me in this or in the pocket dimension, and you're like, okay, and you get out of the pocket dimension and you try and stab him. But I guess when you get out of the pocket dimension, it puts you in the ballroom with the beholder and fake Quill. So it's just like this weird thing where it's like, no matter what you do, you end up at this scene where either Quill lets you stab him and everything ends, or he teleports away, you have to deal with the beholder and the fake Quill, and then you find him.
And then there's a whole section of the adventure, I guess, where you're hunting for Quill in Wisteria Vale, which doesn't seem like it would be super interesting.
Right.
And also,
if he dies, which I'm not even completely concretely, like, I guess it's if the beholder kills him, because you can't kill him, right? Or can you, like, it's like you have to stab him in the hand. I just don't get, like, in what context he's going to die unless the beholder kills him off.
Because I guess the way that it's written, it's not really necessary to actually have a fight with the beholder.
No. It's like it happens if you attack the fake Quill, but if you know the fake Quill's a fake because you've met the real Quill, you wouldn't do that because he can't. It's not like he can attack you. It's just like a weird event, like confluence of events that doesn't really logistically make sense, other than it feels like they were trying to make it more complex than it needs to be.
Yeah, which is to say, so the positive guidance that we can take from it is like, simplify it for yourself. Make it make sense for yourself.
Right.
And
show the players it. Don't tell the players.
Right. Find a way to make it so that the players know the minimum amount that they need to know to actually make meaningful decisions about how to confront the situation that's here. Right. Because if you don't even understand what's going on,
they for sure will.
They super don't understand what's going on. So where you're investing your time should be to connect all these things together and figure out kind of then which elements of this adventure work best to have the sort of fun of exploring the situation that you've created. So if that involves cutting out some of this extra stuff where there are these extra painting rooms, or, you know, if it involves making a fight with the beholder a more central element of the thing, or making it so that, like, you have to fight Quill, but Quill has this magic shield unless you take down the beholder or some other thing, and then you can stab Quill. You know what I mean? I don't know what it looks like exactly, but there isn't a meaningful combat encounter in this adventure either. Like, there are cool monsters, but, like,
right, there's like the random encounter
fight with the beholder. Yeah, if you get into the fight with the beholder, the one that's kind of couched as the final encounter of the thing, you're not gonna fight the beholder. You're just gonna stab Quill, right?
Right, but the thing is, when Quill realizes that his invincibility is gone, he will teleport away, so he doesn't know that the beholder affects it. Like, it's just like a weird, like, nobody knows what's going on.
I would change a lot of that stuff.
It really feels like
think
absolutely nobody, not the Beholder, not the faction that sends you in, and not the real Quill, knows what actually is going on. And I feel like that's just intrinsically bad, because if nobody in the adventure knows what's going on, the players for sure won't be able to piece it together either.
Yeah, and they don't have an incentive to.
No, their mission is to go stab this guy. It doesn't matter why they have to. It doesn't matter what any specific faction wants. It's just about, I mean, the only want is the faction that hires you wants you to stab him. For reasons. Because they can cure him with the stab. Because he's in, like, you know what I mean? Like, even just getting through the narrative of the story of how he got corrupted feels maybe like,
that's the double setup issue.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I would just give that information as much of it as is necessary up front, and not very much of it is necessary.
No.
Unless like I said, you want to run this as multiple sessions, and I would have that set up and something more meaningful around actually getting your hands on the book or something. But then you've got to come up with basically a whole separate adventure, right?
Right.
Because it's not really... Because even the adventure summary here says, like, the adventure begins when they go to Wisteria Vale.
Right.
So I don't know why you would dwell on all the stuff before that.
Right,
Except for the fact that it ends up being important to understand why anything is going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and even that, to a degree, is, like, malleable, right? Like, you just need a reason that like, the story of how Quill gets corrupted or whatever could be anything. You know what I mean? It could be anything. Yeah. The reason...
What Quill's deal is, Quill could be anybody.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool. Which I think allows this adventure to potentially fit into some other context, right?
Sure. If you put, like, an NPC or something that the characters need to access in Quill's place, they then at least have a vested interest from the get-go to return them alive to the real world. Do you know what I mean? But again, it just relies so much on the context of the current adventure that you are slotting this module into, and if you're running it as a one-shot, or at the very least as like an isolated, you know, modular adventure, as written, you need it's too diluted or too, like, pulled in a bunch of different directions for the PCs, I think, to really wrap their head around it without a lot of exposition, which, again, you need to show and not tell, and showing them would take a lot of time and planning on who has that information, why they have that information, etc.
Yeah.
Well,
so
yeah, I think that's... we've talked it through quite a bit. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts, closing ideas?
Definitely, I like Quill. I like the idea of using this adventure to set up a character who might be an ongoing concern in your campaign. But I think that the logistics of the adventure as written are a little bit needlessly complicated, that you could make this more streamlined to get to the good parts of it. Because the thing is, like, as it stands, a lot of it seems superfluous. A lot of cool stuff seems superfluous. So finding a way to activate the village and the kind of vibe of these constructed commoners, finding a way to activate the Beholder so that it feels more relevant to your objective in a more explicit way for the PCs would help. You know, simplifying and activating the cool stuff that's there, or just straight up stealing stuff and using it for your own devices for something else. You know what I mean?
There's some cool ideas in here. I just don't think that the connective tissue is well established. Do you know what I mean?
And it makes it hard to get the stakes
Right, exactly.
You know?
And you know, just kind of in summary of, you know, what we have here, you know, demi-plane equals demi-stakes. That is pretty self-explanatory. If you're putting something, you know, in an isolated universe, you need to make sure that the motivations outside of that universe are well established for every party involved. Lore should be relevant, meaning, you know, if it's, you know, not the Harpers, if that doesn't make sense for your specific campaign, you know, change it so it does. And same thing with why the, you know, Beholder is there, or why the villain, be it Quill or whoever you choose to slot in, is trapped in the Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale. And lastly, logistically complex is more just like a note to know you're going to have to really do some mental gymnastics and fitting to make all of this make sense as a linear adventure or linear story. Because otherwise it feels way too chaotic for the players to wrap their heads around it. Yeah. Double setup on your end. Do you want to talk about yours?
I mean, I think that we've talked them through, but it's like we said,
I just wanted to give like a
the
summary.
double setup. There's a lot of exposition that's not required. There's a lot of exposition written into this module. Not all of it is necessary, especially if you change kind of what the core through line of the module is. So just be aware that you can change that stuff, and you probably should. You should probably pick a camp, right? Like, right. Is it about Quill, or is it about the Beholder kind of throwing the thing off? Unless you want to lengthen the whole thing, but you'll have to add some stuff to put meat on the bones of that, so it's not just like double exposition.
Right.
Like I said, I like Quill's stat block. I would steal some of that stuff for cool bard. It's just a cool bard, you know, cool high level bard stat block. So definitely just check that out, even if you have no intention of running this adventure. I liked that stat block. And the roll tables. I mean, I personally, as a DM, am trying to come around to how... I mean, random roll tables, for better or worse, are a Dungeons & Dragons thing. How you use them effectively is a big sort of macro question for yourself as a DM.
Right.
But, like, especially in this adventure... I like the roll tables that are sort of for the manor, at least as an inspiration point of like what's going on at the manor when you go to visit. But if you're just doing the party, you're not going to use that.
Right.
The Beholder effects table, like, take it or leave it. Use it sparingly. Use it with intention. Like, take the intention of the roll tables more than the feeling of necessity to actually roll on them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's generally my opinion on roll tables in general. I don't necessarily think that they're bad, but I think that there needs to be a lot of reason behind each option on the roll table. Like, having it feel like more of a chaotic event, I think, just throws the players through another loop they don't need.
Yeah. I mean, it can be valuable, but it can also just be... I would introduce random rolls when the players are very clear on what they're doing and having success.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
If you don't already have some kind of obstacle ready for them.
Yeah.
But just doing it to do it, especially if the players aren't... In an adventure like this, I can imagine the players not being super clear on what's going on. This is just adding literally random information that may not actually serve them in any way, either as an obstacle or as a clue. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So just be mindful about that. Why are you rolling on this table?
Yeah.
You know, is the question you should always ask.
Yeah.
I think that kind of sums it up. We have those notes from the discussion that we had too, but I think that we've covered those bases plenty.
Yeah, we've been talking
I
for
feel
an hour.
like I think this has been a good discussion. I feel like I can walk
too.
away and prep a halfway decent version of this adventure. So thank you, Baxter, and thank you all for joining us. Thanks for listening along. We hope that, you know, this was thought-provoking for you, and good luck running the adventure.
Well, I think that'll do us this time. If you guys enjoyed it, please give it a like. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you'll know anytime we're dropping any kind of new content. The Homebrew Book Clubs are going to keep coming. In terms of comments, I mean, this is supposed to be an open discussion. So if you guys have anything you want to say, an idea, a thought, anything, put it in the comment section down below so we can engage with you and have more conversation in this Homebrew Book Club.
Yes, and if you want to support the channel further, consider checking out the link in the description down below and visiting our Patreon. You can join our founding patron, Gilbert Got a Game. Big shout out to our friend Gilbert Got a Game. And what are you doing? If you're watching this video to the end, you're already part of the family. Consider supporting the channel. Join Gilbert Got a Game. If we get enough of our founding patrons, we're going to start a Discord server so we can all talk to each other in real time. And there's a lot of bonus content going up in that Patreon feed. You can learn about it, as I said, in the description down below.
Absolutely. But I think for now, we're going to sign off and start prepping for the next Homebrew Book Club. I'm Baxter.
And I'm Ben. And remember, start adventuring.
Just start adventuring.